Good evening and welcome. I can hear myself. Okay.
Good.
Nice to see some of your faces again after our last meeting. So this is a follow-up to our first stakeholder meeting that we had a couple months ago about North Water Street Beach. At that meeting, we kind of heard from everybody about their concerns. This is a project with the Land Trust. I'm Alex Solo, the Executive Director of the Land Trust. I have with me Ryan, one of our board members, and our friends from Woods Hole Group who have been working on this. This is a follow-up to the last meeting, and we will be seeing some of the work that the group's been doing on it, alternatives for the site, talking through some of the different options, with a chance to hear from you all again. So I'll pass it to Ryan if there's anything you want to add.
Well, I just want to thank you all for coming again. I see a lot of repeat faces in the audience, some new faces. We're really glad that this project is getting so much engagement from the community, and we're really thankful for you all for being here tonight. I think most people in the room have heard me at this point, but I do want to remind people that the slides are going to be on that wall. Up here is not going to be the focus. So if people want to go sit over here next to me, I promise I won't bite, or even just move their chairs at some point to get a better view, we would invite you all to do so. And you're welcome to do that as the slides start, but now would be a better time so that we don't disrupt the flow of the meeting. So,
All right.
give you guys a few minutes to do that. Next, I'll turn it to Adam and Linnea from Woods Hole Group, who have been doing this work for us on behalf of the Land Trust. I do also want to thank or recognize the State Office of Coastal Zone Management for providing the funding for this feasibility study for the North Water Street Beach seawall. Without them, we wouldn't have been able to bring Adam and Linnea in, and they're experts. They're going to show you all the potential futures for the wall today, or at least maybe not all of them, but some of them.
Some of them, yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much, Ryan and Alex. My name is Adam Finkel. I'm a coastal scientist with the Woods Hole Group. We're an environmental consulting firm that's just over the bridge in Bourne, right across from Atlantic Subaru. So we're local. We love a lot of the same places that the neighbors do. And we like to share those places, both on the Cape and on the South Coast and on the South Shore. So like Alex and Ryan mentioned, this is our second stakeholder engagement meeting. The first meeting was very well attended, and just echoing Alex, really appreciate the turnout at that first meeting and see some familiar faces here tonight. Speaking frankly, it's one of the best turnouts that we've had at a stakeholder engagement event in the past 10 years or so. So we really do appreciate people coming out. At that first meeting, we really heard back from the community about what their concerns were and what their favorite aspects of the site were and what their vision for the site was moving forward. And as we work through the slides today, we did incorporate in quite a bit of, incorporate quite a bit of that feedback into some of the concepts that we developed. So just thinking about the agenda for tonight, we're working our way through introductions. I'll provide you with a brief update on the status of the project and a little bit of background if we've got some new faces in the room tonight. I've got a brief overview of feedback that was received during that first stakeholder meeting. So what we heard back directly from folks who participated. And then we took that feedback and we tried to consider the interests that the neighbors have and the interests that the trust has as the landowner, and then the interests that the town has as the road owner with a right-of-way that extends out into the trust parcel. And we came up with a series of conceptual alternatives. And what that means is not what ultimately should be done at the site, but a series of options about what could be done if we get good agreement from the trust, from the town, from the neighbors, from the state, whoever's going to fund it, et cetera. So I just want to be clear that coming out of tonight's meeting, we're not charged with like a perfectly clear direction. We're still very, very early on in the process, and I just want to make that very clear to everybody. After we run through the conceptual alternatives, we'd like to solicit feedback. We'd like to hear back from you about what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, because again, being so early in the process now is really the time to continue incorporating in that feedback. And just a question for IT, actually. Is it possible to minimize that small little window in Zoom? Perfect. All right.
Bring chairs up in here as well, if you'd like.
Yeah, you guys are welcome to come up and sit as close as you like or bring chairs up.
There's plenty of space to open up here. People are interested.
And echoing Ryan, really appreciate the funding that was provided from the Massachusetts Coastal Zone Management Office for this project and participation from the trust and from the public and from the town of Wareham. So this is just a quick overview of the status of the project. We know that we have some new faces in the room tonight as well. So in the figure shown at right, the orange area is the study area. So extending along North Water Street, taking the curve onto Cove Street and extending to the Association Beach. The green area, which is a little bit hard to make out, but that very thin strip is the area that's currently owned by Wareham Land Trust. So one of their oldest parcels and just a thin strip of land extending from the end of the road over the seawall. And as everybody knows, that seawall is really critical infrastructure for the site and the adjacent communities. So the task that we worked on as a part of this project, task one was to document the existing conditions, and that task is now complete. Just to give you a little bit of background on what that entailed, that involved one of our coastal engineers going out to the site and assessing the condition of the seawall. So getting a status update on the condition of the seawall. It involved my team going out and doing some mapping of the resource areas. That means delineating beach from dune, from coastal bank, from salt marsh, et cetera. And it also involved us going out and conducting an existing condition survey of the site. And that's the first step in any project like this, is to go out, get a survey crew there, and actually map what's on the ground. Because if you want to make any changes in the future, you've got to establish that baseline. The next task that we took on was a vulnerability assessment, and that was led by Linnea and her team. And although this project is really focused on the critical infrastructure, focused on the integrity and the resilience of the seawall, which we all know is failing, it was really important for us to conduct the vulnerability assessment, because that gives us an idea of what the current flood risk to the land trust parcel and the adjacent neighborhoods look like, and how we expect that flood risk to change. So how much higher do we anticipate the tides to be, not just next year, but in 2030, 2050, and 2070? Because if anybody's going to be investing in the seawall, they're probably going to want a 30 to 50 year engineering design life out of that project, the most bang for your buck. And so understanding how flood risk is going to change over the next 50 years is critically important. So that vulnerability assessment let us know how the high tide conditions are expected to change and how coastal storm impacts to the site are expected to change over that same time horizon. And that really helped us to wrap our heads around what might be possible at the site. What types of alternatives should we be considering? Which ones should we be ruling out early on in the process? The next task, which we're currently working on now, is the alternatives analysis and the reporting. So based on the existing conditions assessment, based on the vulnerability assessment, we took what we learned and we came up with a series of 4 alternatives that we think could potentially help to improve the condition of the seawall and the resilience of the site and what's located landward of it. We all know houses, utilities, roadways, et cetera. And we're also here as a part of, I think it's task 5, which is the public education component and the public meeting component. So getting together with neighbors to talk about the project, solicit feedback, and try to make sure that we hear you and incorporate that feedback into the alternatives that we ultimately finalize and deliver to the trust. So like I mentioned just a minute ago, just want to acknowledge that we've got a lot of different interests and priorities on this site. We've got the trust as the owner. We've got the town of Wareham that owns the roadway, the associated utilities, and a big right-of-way that extends out into the thin strip that the trust owns. Then we've got neighbors and abutters, and we have folks that just intermittently use the site during the summer. So when we started to develop the alternatives, we really tried to take as balanced an approach as we could when we thought about improvements to the wall and to the infrastructure along the street. And there's definitely got to be collaborative thinking moving forward regarding how the site's currently used, its condition, concerns that folks have, and then the future vision from the site from a practical perspective regarding the wall, and then from kind of a visioning perspective. In addition to improving the wall, what else could we do to improve the way that people access the site, improve the habitat value of what currently is just kind of a gray concrete wall. So we're really trying to take that balanced approach. Thinking back to the first stakeholder meeting, like I mentioned, we had an incredibly engaged group. These were some of the key takeaways that we heard and did what we could to incorporate into the various alternatives that Linnea is going to review in just a couple of minutes. So we hear you, and we certainly are doing what we can and when we can to incorporate in the feedback received. So super popular site, both for locals and for visitors. Appreciation for the scenic vista and kind of cocktail hour in the summer and watching the sunset, et cetera. It's a beautiful spot. We heard a lot about it being a great access point for swimming, paddleboarding, kayaking, and shellfishing, a lot of which is accessed right over the existing wall. We heard a lot about a desire to maintain an interesting beach area. So it's an area that people utilize and enjoy, and folks don't want to see that go away. We heard you loud and clear that the stairs are in disrepair and are a safety concern, and I know that the trust may have some points to add as we start walking through some of the alternatives about some things that they think are immediately actionable, regardless of what happens in the long term for the wall. We heard about concerns for waste management for both litter and for dog waste at the site, and then a preference for a balanced approach to the site restoration and revegetation. So as a wetland scientist and restoration practitioner, I always love to pack sites full of native plants, which do a great job of holding together eroding banks. But we did hear loud and clear that we want to make sure that we take a balanced approach, maybe cluster those plantings, maintain the vista, et cetera. So a very high-level overview of the alternatives that we're going to be talking about this evening, and then Linnea is going to go into much greater detail regarding alternatives 1 through 4. So the first alternative is the lightest approach possible. So sometimes we run up against concerns regarding funding, regarding buy-in, regarding a town meeting vote, regarding budgets, et cetera. So the first alternative really considers the bare minimum that would need to be done to the wall and areas adjacent to it in order to maintain the status quo to the maximum extent that we can. Obviously, some things will change. Stairs might be improved. Some plantings might go in the ground. We might try to enhance the salt marsh way over on Cove Street. There are some ancillary benefits that we think we could incorporate. But alternative 1 really just looks to repair the existing infrastructure and not make any wholesale changes. The second alternative is one that we came into the project thinking might be a viable alternative in this location. And now we're kind of leaning away from that. And this involves removing the existing seawall and stabilizing the existing coastal bank, but with how valuable all the infrastructure is, the roadway, the utilities, et cetera, being totally upfront with everybody. After looking at the results of the vulnerability assessment, we're really heavily leaning towards ruling that out. We just don't think we can hold that edge without some form of coastal stabilization, okay? The third alternative would be to replace the seawall, and that would involve either replacing it in kind with concrete or alternatively driving either steel or poly sheeting, so driving sheet piles in, which tend to be more durable than concrete. And this alternative could be constructed either at the same crest elevation as the existing wall or to add a little bit of elevation. We know that we can't keep all the floodwaters out. We got to acknowledge that. But we know that we might be able to keep some of them out if we go a little bit higher with the wall. And then the last alternative is a rock revetment. So when you build vertical walls, you tend to get erosion and scour out in front of them. And you tend to get a beach elevation that decreases over the course of time. And I'm sure that some of you can relate to going out at high tide during a moon tide, a big spring tide, and having very little beach there at high tide. One way to potentially reduce that is to go from a vertical structure to one that is on a slant and construct the shoreline protection out of rock instead of concrete or steel or sheeting. And there are some positives and negatives to that, and we can talk about that as we get a little bit later on into the conversation. I just want to be clear that all four of these alternatives, I'm giving you kind of the bare bones definition here, but all four of them include what I would consider to be additional a la carte improvements that could be made. Things like, do we need more signage? Do we need a couple extra parking spots? Do we need a couple of benches? Do we need to rebuild the stairs? And so when Linnea walks through these alternatives, we're showing everything on the slide, but really consider each of the pieces that we're proposing to be a la carte. They could be considered separately, included, or removed. I think it's also really important to just, again, reiterate that the alternatives are conceptual. We were on board to come up with some ideas. We weren't brought on board at this stage, nor are we at the point where we're putting together a design of what should ultimately be done out here. And to be very clear, no decisions have been made. That's why we're here tonight, is to share where we're at and hear back from you. I think the last point I'll make before turning it over to Linnea, and I'm gonna get up, but I'm gonna talk loud into a mic over by the screen. I can do that too. It's pretty hot in here too. Thank goodness. All right. Linnea comes from a landscape architecture background, and part of the reason that we included this figure was to show how the shoreline varies considerably along North Water Street. So if you look at the intersection here, heading down North Water Street towards Cove, all of the big blobs that are shown in green, this is coastal dune over here in the corner. We've got a little bit of fringing salt marsh. There's clustered vegetation in these patches as you extend along the road. And you can also see that at high tide, you've got varying amounts of beach that remain high and dry. So you've got a little patch of beach here, little patch of beach here, and that high tide line kind of varies along the shoreline as you head down the road. And so one of the things that we really tried to do, and I think you'll see this as Linnea runs through the alternatives, is we tried to embrace some of the natural features that we saw on site. If we were proposing things like beach nourishment, we tried to focus it in areas where there is a little bit of high tide beach at high tide. If we considered things like salt marsh enhancement, which we're not proposing here, all the way around the corner on Cove Street, we tried to do it in areas where there's already salt marsh growing and embrace the natural condition to the best we could and include some enhancements in addition to just going out to rebuild hard infrastructure. So just wanted to preface that. And I think at that point, I'll turn it over to Linnea.
Thank you, Adam. So, as Adam said, we were looking to kind of draw on some of the way that the site is already and the way that you all use it, and it's kind of different pockets. But there are also some other elements that we want to bring in, that we want to discuss some, definitions and features, just so that when we say a living shoreline, you have a picture in your head of what that means if you haven't heard of it before. So in the upper left, we have a head wall with 2 stormwater outfalls in it. And these are places where all the stormwater that collects in the neighborhood behind comes out. Feel free to move anytime. And when we say a head wall, this is what we mean. It's just a short segment of wall that protects those stormwater outfalls. To the right of that, we have a living shoreline enhancement from up in Braintree. So this is a place where the salt marsh has kind of been stabilized and expanded towards the river to its original footprint and then planted. And then that allows it to really grow in and stay stable rather than continuing to erode. On the bottom left, there's some stairs that have a kayak slide. So this is a feature that could possibly go with some of the stairs on the site if the stairs are rebuilt. That allows you to much more easily carry a kayak downstairs. And then another feature for access is a Moby mat. You might have seen these at some beaches. There are these seasonal mats that can be rolled out and easily put away at the end of the season. And we're thinking about possibly providing some access that isn't on stairs. And a Moby mat could provide a good surface to walk or roll on for that. Another thing that we're thinking about is the different ways that you can occupy a developed shoreline. So the different kind of stepped seawalls that we sometimes see, or revetment that you can sit on, or really high design things like the thing in the middle. That's basically a constructed urban beach. But we did want to think about outside the box a little bit and get your feedback on what some of that space could look like, where it's built up as intertidal space for people to occupy, and just see how that feels. As Adam said, these are all ideas at this point, and so we just want to look at it all and see what you think. When I go through the alternatives, so this is North Water Street at the top here, and then Cove Street on the right. So the map has been twisted, north is to the right. There's going to be 2 views because it's kind of a long, awkward site. So we're going to look at this first box on the left. That will be the North Water Street view. And then we'll also look at Cove Street individually. So just to preface that so that we all know what to expect. And these are the existing conditions, as we say. So I've shown the seawall in black, and then stairs are in yellow. Something to note is that there are actually 7 sets of stairs on North Water Street. There's a lot of access there, and 4 on Cove Street. And then the stormwater outfalls are being shown in red. There are ongoing projects with the stormwater here, so it's a little bit unclear how that will play out and how things will incorporate with any work on the seawall or any construction here. So we're kind of making a note of that in this and making a note that the stormwater project needs to be considered as these alternatives are considered. Oh. Yeah, is it possible to turn my mic louder? This is about as loud as my voice goes. Can you hear better now?
Try this.
Okay, is this a better mic?
We can turn you up.
Can you, okay,
Yeah.
try, if you can try
I think
and
there
turn
might
me
be
up.
buttons on the microphone base.
Okay, am I louder now? Okay, I'm sorry about that. Thank you for speaking up. I know I have a soft voice.
I just like to remind people that there are seats up here. I know
Yes,
the text is
you're
kind of
also
anyone
welcome to,
Would like to get closer is welcome to.
They're more comfortable.
they are very comfortable. Yeah, so you all know the site there, as we said, these clusters of vegetation.
If anybody is having trouble hearing, that speaker over there is pointed at the crowd.
Ah.
So if you go over to that side, it might be a little easier
Yeah.
to hear.
You won't be able to see the slides, but you'll be able to
It's, yeah. I'll try to speak up a little bit too. This is probably a little easier to hear. So if I direct your attention to on the North Water Street picture, there's this dashed line that's showing a cross section. Basically, that's like a slice through the land. So it's going to be facing the bridge. I'm going to go to it in a minute. We'll see the bridge in the background. But it's basically taking a slice right there so that you can see the way that the road and the seawall and the beach relate to each other vertically. So this is that cross-section A. You can see the bridge in the background there, and those trees in front of the bridge. And then on the left, there's North Water Street. There's those stones that people have placed to prevent parking. There's not actually a bench here, but we've placed one for a reason, to show with some of the alternatives. And then going on to the seawall, and this is, I'm a lot louder. This is a place where a stormwater outfall comes out. It's currently a little bit clogged, and like I said, there's a project going on with that. On the right side, I'm showing mean high water. So that's the average of all the high tides over a long period of time, both the present, which is from 2008. So if you say, oh, there's a huge difference between present and 2030, that's why, because present is 2008 in this case. And then 2030, 50, and 70. These are just, as Adam said, so that we can see these alternatives in the context of them being there for a long time. And also in terms of trying to maintain water access, even when water levels are higher. The other thing I'll say about these years is that they shouldn't be taken literally. So these are based on projections that the state of Massachusetts chose because they wanted to really avoid underplanning for sea level rise. They were thinking about Logan Airport. They were thinking about the Boston Artery Tunnel system, things where you really cannot underplan. And so they went for a really conservative scenario. So usually when I'm presenting vulnerability assessments, I say as soon as 2030, as soon as 2050, and as soon as 2070, because this top line is probably more like between 2070 and 2100. It'll happen at some point. So that's just to put those water levels on the right in context. So alternative one, as Adam said, is the lightest touch. It's hopefully the least expensive, and it is trying to just repair the seawall and enhance the site as it is, both habitat-wise and for human access. So starting on the left here at the corner with Onset Ave, this proposes making a natural surface path onto the beach through that sort of dune area before the seawall starts. There's also a little bit of space where, if it was desired, there could be a few parking spaces, and definitely space for a bike rack. We're proposing placing larger boulders along the edge of North Water Street to kind of beef up that parking prevention and hopefully make it more effective. And these elements are in many of the alternatives, so I won't have to go through them multiple times. You'll notice originally there were 7 sets of stairs over the seawall on North Water Street. We're proposing consolidating that access. So rather than having 7 sets of stairs that are in disrepair, that might be hard for the land trust to maintain, or whoever the landowner is to maintain, we're saying, okay, what if it were 3 really good sets of stairs, maybe with a kayak slide as shown, with good handrails that can be maintained in good condition. This also proposes some targeted native plantings in areas where there's already vegetation. And yes, repairing the seawall, I think I said that already. So this is likely the least expensive. As I said, it improves the stairs, which is great, and there's some habitat improvements. But the biggest thing about this alternative is that it's not really a long-term measure. It won't last forever, and it could be considered kind of an interim measure if there's a transition period for the site and there needs to be something to keep it going. But for some reason, we're not ready to do a big construction project just yet.
And I think that's a great point, that it like Linnea said, it could be considered an interim measure. It's something that wouldn't ultimately last forever. And it's not a replacement for a failing wall, but it's something that could be done in the interim to keep the infrastructure going until a more permanent solution could be implemented.
Yes. So looking at that on Cove Street, it's very similar. The seawall is being repaired. We're going down to 2 sets of stairs, so one here and one here, and trying to keep those in great condition. And then we're also proposing, there's an area where there's knotweed here, and there's an area where there's bittersweet, and we're proposing trying to remove those invasive plants and revegetating with native vegetation. this is what that looks like at cross section A on North Water Street. Again, here's the bridge in the background. Not much change, just the larger stones to prevent parking, repairing the seawall, and then you can see on all the alternatives there will be stormwater system improvements TBD, because it's a little bit unclear exactly what will happen with that, but there will likely be some changes. Alternative 2, as Adam described earlier, is removal of the wall and creating a living shoreline and really focusing on habitat value while still trying to maintain public access and some space for people. So starting at the left, rather than a natural surface path, another option would be to do an aluminum ramp that can be removed seasonally. There's enough space here for the ramp to possibly be at a really gentle slope and be really easy to navigate for a lot of different people. So that could be a good option. The cross section here is going through one of the more interesting features, which is we're proposing placing large pieces of stone around the stormwater outfalls. You might see on the site already that there are smaller stones underneath to kind of prevent erosion, but we wanted to kind of expand on that, and where, in this case, where the head walls are being reconstructed for those stormwater outfalls, try to create some space that people could sit on, but is also preventing erosion and also protecting those outfalls. We're again going down to actually only 2 sets of stairs in this case, because we're proposing building some stone stairs into those head walls. So you have an access to the corner here, an access here, an access at each of the yellow sets of stairs, and then an access at the other stormwater outfalls as well.
Can you pause just for a
Yes.
moment, just because it's very hard to see?
It is really hard to see, yeah.
So this is just reiterating. Hopefully I'm talking loud enough. This is just reiterating what Linnea just said, but I wanted to make sure I was pointing that out. So although there's a reduction in the number of individual sets of stairs, what we were considering was access from the corner with Onset Ave, potential access or stairs that are built right into the head wall.
Sorry, I didn't realize that was over
That's
there.
okay. Maintenance of or reconstruction of the wooden stairs here at the center. Another reconstructed stormwater head wall, but with access over the top of it, and likely just granite slab stairs that are built right in, or larger slabs that you can access if you're able-bodied, or sit on if you would like the recreational space. And then the final set of wooden stairs down at this end. So a reduction in the number of stairs that need to be maintained, but maintenance of the number of individual access points along the road.
Yes. So before I go to the cross section, we'll just say that this is really great for habitat improvement. That's a huge pro of this. But it is a higher cost alternative. And as Adam said at the beginning, it's likely not going to be effective for protecting the infrastructure. So that is a big knock on this alternative. But at cross section A, which we will look at for on Cove Street, there's the proposal to keep the seawall actually, because the elevation difference is so much. There's not really another way we could see to hold that edge other than repairing or replacing the seawall. But behind that, it's all planted coastal bank with the stairs going across for access. And then in front of the seawall, we're proposing some salt marsh enhancement. So trying to raise the elevation of the marsh platform a little bit to give it a chance against the higher sea levels, and then maybe expanding the area and planting some salt marsh vegetation as well. So this is the cross section A. You'll notice that this is one of the locations where the seawall is reconstructed. So we also have a couple other cross sections just as examples that will show you where the seawall is removed. But we have a berm here, which could possibly offer a little bit of flood protection to the road with some native plantings on it. And then in front of the head wall where the stormwater outfall would come out, we have those large pieces of rock where someone could sit or stand, and it's sort of a place that you can occupy in higher water levels. So here's another view a little bit further away, further north from the bridge. And this shows one method of soft stabilization where basically you wrap a bunch of sediment in a biodegradable coir envelope and then place wooden stakes in front of that to hold the edge, and then blanketing over with dune, and then there's a berm in here as well that could work for some flood protection. And then another way it could look is removing the seawall entirely and not placing any soft stabilization and just relying on a coastal bank that's planted and a dune that's planted, and relying on those plants on top of the soil surface to stabilize the slope.
And I just want to be clear and just make one additional point here. So the living shoreline approach is something that is near and dear to me as a wetland scientist and restoration practitioner. Wherever I can, I like to be able to rely on natural systems to hold banks together. Vegetation is remarkably effective. Biodegradable materials can be remarkably effective. But one of the first questions that we always start with, whether we're talking to a town, the land trust, coastal zone management office, if we're developing a project with them, is what are you protecting? And so in this case, we're protecting critical roadway infrastructure, utility infrastructure, an evacuation route, an emergency access route. And so in this case, that's part of our reasoning for leaning away from the living shorelines approach, is just how critical that infrastructure is. If the town or the trust or others had approached us and they said, oh, we've got a really great waterfront park with a failing seawall, maybe the best approach would be a living shoreline in that case, because if a portion of the park eroded, it's less critical than utility infrastructure or a roadway. So I just wanted to contextualize our thinking around a living shoreline in this location.
Absolutely. So segueing from that, the third alternative is very similar to the second alternative in that it looks the same on the surface, but the seawall is reconstructed. So basically underneath all of those areas of living shoreline, there's a seawall that's kind of acting as a backup in case there is a big storm event or something happens and you have a lot of erosion. So this is probably among the higher cost things that one could do here, because not only do you have a living shoreline, but you're also reconstructing the seawall, which can be expensive to do. On Cove Street, it's exactly the same as we looked at for the other alternative, because we had maintained the seawall there. In the cross section, though, we're showing a different kind of seawall. So this is what Adam mentioned, the sheet pile, which is steel or composite and is driven deep into the ground, but it's very thin compared to a concrete seawall. So that can be an advantage. And it has a timber cap on it, more comfortable to sit on, but it could possibly be raised. So there's a faint kind of dashed line there that shows, yeah, it's impossible to see, but it could be raised higher and allow some more flood protection to be gained, or a different kind of bank to be formed here. But at all the stormwater outfalls, we're still maintaining this idea of protecting them while creating some more space for people to occupy.
Could you please go back to the plan view for North Water Street?
Mm-hmm.
So I want to be clear with this alternative, which includes reconstruction of the seawall, but rather than leaving the seawall out there with a raw concrete or poly edge or even a concrete edge, what this proposes is actually having some of the sand or some of the shoreline extend right over the top of the seawall. So you're embedding it in either nourishment sand or a vegetated slope. So if under ideal conditions, you're able to hold that slope and maintain it over the course of time, but over the course of time or during a storm event, if it erodes back, you're not eroding all the way back to the roadway. There is hard infrastructure backing up that approach. And I think that this is the type of project where if the town or the trust decided that they wanted to move forward with seawall reconstruction, we would sit with them and try to get really targeted where we felt like we had a high degree of confidence in being able to maintain a slope that goes right up and over the wall. Because there are likely some areas along this section of shoreline where there's enough flow and erosion and scour from the channel where we probably wouldn't stand a very good chance of holding the line. But there are other areas, thinking all the way back to one of those introductory slides where I showed there are some pocket beaches that exist here, here, and then further down in this direction towards Cove Street. And so maybe we focus any additional enhancements in those areas where they already exist. So we're not trying to fight Mother Nature or reinvent the wheel. So just wanted to be very clear about that approach.
Yes. Yes.
Is this all taken into consideration that Hurricane Bob, North Water Street was completely covered with water?
So the question is, are we taking into consideration that this has flooded in the past during Hurricane Bob, for example? And yes, we've looked at the vulnerability, and it's clear that during storms, North Water Street is expected to flood. Some of these alternatives, like I just showed, have the ability to raise the wall or to put a berm on top of the wall.
Can you go to
Yeah,
that
I can go to
cross-section?
that. Yeah, that could possibly provide some flood protection. But what I'll say is the land trust owned parcel and seawall, it only goes part of the way that you would need to go in order to block all the water coming in. So it could slow it down, but the water will still go around and come onto North Water Street.
Or
So-
potentially come across Onset Ave in a really big event.
Yeah,
So
that's the primary way that it would come around, is across Onset Ave. Yeah.
So one of our primary objectives on this project is to make sure that when the next Hurricane Bob or similar storm happens, that wall doesn't fail and that the road isn't lost. We acknowledge the fact that there may be flooding in the neighborhood, and we don't think the wall alone is enough to keep that flooding out, but we do want to make sure that there is some reinvestment in that infrastructure to make sure that the wall doesn't fail during a storm and the town and the community loses the road entirely.
Because when you go around the corner and you're now on Cove, Hurricane Sandy, which I was there,
Mm-hmm.
the water was 2 inches from coming over the top on Cove.
Yeah, so they're saying the water almost came over Cove Street during Hurricane Sandy as well.
People
Yeah.
floating up against houses on North Water Street.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, go ahead. That's a great question. So they're asking, could the wall be higher initially, or would it be added on to after it's built? It can happen both ways. I think in this case, it would probably be built at an elevation and stay there. But it is possible, especially with a concrete seawall, to build it in a way where it's rated to become higher. So it's strong enough at the base that it could be higher in the future. But I think with sheet pile, you usually only want to drive it once because it's pretty expensive and difficult to do.
And I would agree. If it were to be rebuilt, you'd probably want to build it to the higher elevation. I would be a little bit hesitant to elevate the current seawall in its current condition, just because I don't know as though the footing could take that extra weight and capacity. But that's a great question. I think that anything that we built, let's say it wasn't built to a higher elevation for whatever reason, that wouldn't be the cost-effective way to do it. But if it happened that way, I think that we would be very mindful with any future design work to make it adaptable, to be able to add height over the course of time if needed. It's a great question.
So I have one more alternative, and then we'll have a lot of time for questions. This is what Adam mentioned at the beginning, where you take that vertical seawall and you slope it back to try to build more resilience to erosion. You know, you don't get that erosion at the toe of the structure like you would with a vertical seawall. So this replaces the seawall with a rock revetment. We're proposing building stairs into the revetment so that they would be kind of strong and part of the feature. We're still proposing these rocky areas at the stormwater outfalls, although as we've said, you know, everything here is a piece of the puzzle and things can kind of be mixed together if that ends up being the best thing to do in the final outcome. We're also proposing some targeted areas of beach nourishment. So near the corner of Onset Ave, near the Wareham Land Trust sign and kiosk currently, and then over near the corner to expand upon the areas where you already have beach and try to make those larger. This is also a pretty high cost alternative. And as you'll see in the cross section, after I go through Cove Street, you do lose some open space just because you can't start that revetment slope until where the seawall is currently. That'll make more sense in a second. So on Cove Street, we are proposing salt marsh enhancement below the revetment, but otherwise it's reducing down to those 2 access points and making sure that they're really strong and built into this new revetment. And here's the cross section. So there's a dashed line where that shows where so Adam's pen right now is where the previous seawall was, and my cursor if you're online. So you can't really start the revetment until that spot, and so that's where what we call the toe of the revetment is, and it slopes back from there, and you can see that the area, the grassy area, where you might sit in a lawn chair right now is a lot narrower in this case. However, if you like to sit on a revetment, that's still possible, and we're still proposing trying to protect the stormwater outfalls and also create a little bit of occupiable space, if possible, seaward of the revetment.
And just one additional point, and this gets to the Hurricane Bob question and flood damage protection in general for this site. So for alternatives, I think 2 and 3, we showed the possibility of a flood protection berm just landward of the wall.
Mm-hmm.
So building up some elevation in the space that's currently occupied by the benches, the Wareham Land Trust sign, et cetera. But by sloping the revetment back, you reduce some of the erosion and scour seaward of it. You do. And it does a better job of absorbing rather than just reflecting wave energy back down onto the beach. But you lose some of that space landward of the wall that you, where we were proposing the flood protection berm before. So we've pinched ourselves at this point. It's an effective shoreline protection approach, but we've pinched ourselves to the point where we don't have a lot of real estate left for any type of berm for additional flood damage protection. And although I said, and we've talked about how really flood damage protection isn't the purpose of the project, trying to maintain the integrity of the shoreline is, but if we can also get some flood damage protection out of it, we'd like to. So it's just when we're weighing the pros and cons of the different approaches, those are the types of things that we're thinking about. We've got great shoreline protection here, but we might have built our way out of adding a berm.
You have a question?
Would the revetment be a superior option to a seawall in terms of beach nourishment and the sustainability of it because of the recoil of a wall? So
Yeah, it's a great question. So if
Just repeat the
They're
question,
asking, yeah.
please.
Yeah, so the question is, are the impacts to the shoreline reduced if you use a sloping rock revetment rather than a seawall?
correct. In terms of the sand nourishment, I'm sure that's high on everybody's priority is maintaining the nourishment that is installed. Is this a better option than a piling, sheet pile seawall?
Better, but neither is ideal. And the reason I say that, and I'm gonna try to keep myself, Linnea, you reel me in if I get over like 30 seconds here,
You're on the clock.
is from a coastal processes perspective. Let's remove ourselves from North Water Street and go like out to the Cape Cod National Seashore, or go to Town Neck Beach in Sandwich, or another local beach that isn't quite as built up. If we have an unarmored shoreline, just the natural Cape Cod National Seashore, the coastal bank and the dunes that are out on the seashore, when a big coastal storm comes through or Hurricane Bob comes through, those landforms naturally erode. And it's the sand that erodes out of those landforms that maintains the elevation of the beach out in front of it. If you put hard infrastructure like a revetment or a seawall in front of it, like this site, or like areas in Marshfield and Duxbury or other areas that are really heavily armored, when you cut off the landform's ability to erode naturally in a storm, there's no sand eroding out of it and maintaining that beach elevation. So not overnight, but over the course of, let's say, 10, 20, 30 years, every time a coastal storm comes through, or even a winter season comes through, the beach elevation gets lower and lower and lower and lower. And that's why at high tide, in a lot of these locations, there's very little, if any, beach left. So getting back to the question about revetment versus seawall, typically a vertical seawall will have a little bit more erosion and scour out front of it and a little bit higher velocity currents that run past it. So typically the beach drops a little bit more precipitously. A rock revetment helps to absorb some of that wave energy and not refract it, not reflect it back down onto the beach, but it's still not an ideal solution because you're still preventing the landform from eroding and contributing that sediment to the adjacent beach. In this location, it's the only option. We got to provide some level of protection, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about the broader coastal processes. That was way more than 30 seconds, but
Yeah,
I feel like
that's
I
okay.
hung on to it.
I know who I'm working with.
You're on a roll.
Yeah, so that's the end of all our alternatives. I'm going to hand it back to Adam so that he can conclude the presentation here, and then we will have a lot of time for discussion. So no worries if you have more questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Linnea, and thanks to folks for jumping in with questions throughout the presentation. I think that we are really cognizant that that's kind of a lot to run through in just 30 minutes or so. And so we reserved the remainder of the time that we have here tonight to open the floor to conversation. I think that we're interested in getting some initial feedback from the group. So thinking a little bit about what features we talked about tonight are most important. Is it just the wall? Is it some flood damage protection? Is it a berm? Is it maintaining the stairs, or at least reinvesting in the stairs to make sure that people can access the site? Is it potentially what Linnea mentioned down near Onset Ave, where there's an option for access without stairs? So thinking about the different features that feel important to members of the community. Any activities or uses you'd like to continue, so that's kind of revisiting the conversation that we had during the first meeting. And then are there any features to scale back, like anything that hopefully we didn't share anything too controversial, we were hoping we weren't. But is there anything that elicits a reaction, like, absolutely no way, this doesn't feel good or like the right direction for the project? I think that it's also important to just think a little bit about what our next steps are, because we've got some time to wrap up the project before June 30th. That's our deadline, the end of the fiscal year for the state. And so our intention is to incorporate feedback from the group, take that feedback and communicate it to the town, and the trust is here tonight, and also to the funders at the Coastal Zone Management Office. So meeting with them to talk about what we've heard, and potentially make some tweaks to the alternatives that we shared tonight based on the feedback received. And then our plan is to summarize everything that was discussed tonight in a report that will be shared out to the community. And we've really received a lot of feedback over the past few years that incorporating in a lot of the visuals that we shared tonight helped to conceptualize what the heck we're talking about. So our intention is to be sharing a report that's really graphics driven and less heavy on the text, so that it doesn't lose folks early on in the process of reading through it. So those are the tasks that we have left, but I'm gonna back off there because we've said quite a bit tonight, and we'll open it up to questions. Sure.
I guess I have two, let's say, concerns, I guess. I'm looking at Cove Street at the end of Cottonwood, pretty much where you plotted those stairs.
Okay.
It's safe to assume that we've lost the beach we had. 20 years ago, we had a beach. We had sand, you could sit there and watch the tide come up. You can't do that now. So I assume nothing that we're talking about here is gonna give us a beach back, number one.
I'm looking at Cove here.
Yeah,
Can you share with me which is the end of, just,
pretty much exactly where those stairs are.
just here,
That's the end of Cottonwood,
between the two marshes?
yes. So my point is, I guess the beach is gone, and we really are not addressing ever getting the beach back. Am I correct in saying that?
I'm going to repeat it before Adam answers. So this person's asking, is it correct that on Cove Street, none of the alternatives are proposing anything that will bring back the beach that's been lost over the past 20, 30 years?
So in that specific location, though, again, it's still early in the process. Linnea's taken down the notes. We weren't proposing beach nourishment in that specific location because it may be a harder sell to the regulatory community, given that you've got salt marsh on either side of it. At the same time, sediment, beach sand nourishment is what helps salt marshes to maintain their elevation relative to sea level rise. So it wasn't a location that we had considered for nourishment, but it's not one that we have to explicitly rule out. And so it is something that we can discuss with the state and see if they'd be open to it.
And I guess the next part of my thing, if I, being very selfish, driving down North Wareham, there were years that you saw a pretty good portion of sand where people could sit.
Mhm.
Now, there's only a few, but there are some. Around the corner, you get onto Cove, like I said, our beach is gone.
Mm-hmm.
It's been gone for maybe 15, 20 years.
And the comment for the folks on Zoom was that along North Water Street, there are still some pocket beaches that are left, but along Cove Street, they've largely eroded over the past 20 to 30 years. And the feedback that I have is where we saw remaining beach on North Water, we are proposing expanding that a bit, best we can, to try to build off the areas that have remained relatively stable and high and dry. We felt a little more constricted over on Cove just with the real estate we've got available, but it's certainly something we could consider.
And one of the other concerns around that, right, Adam, is that if you were to, for example, place a lot of sand along North Water, it could end up in the channel, right?
So that was feedback we got from the town. We tried to be targeted with our beach nourishment on North Water rather than just saying we're going to nourish the full 1,000 feet, because the feedback we got back from the town very quickly was if it mobilizes and ends up in the channel, then you've got a navigation hazard and they're out there dredging. So we're trying to balance it out.
May I
So
ask a question?
My second part would be, being 78 years old, I'm not too worried about going to the beach. So, as multiple choice, which one of these cases are going to give me more room than 2 inches or 3 inches in a storm like Hurricane Sandy? Because more than likely, the beach and all that stuff, I'm only passing that along to someone. Now I'm sitting there and saying, the beach is gone.
Mm-hmm.
So is step 2 for me to be more worried about, flood control?
Right.
Can I get both?
That's a great, yeah.
Or do I get one at the cost of another?
So that's a great question, and I'm going to try to repeat it here. So the question was, which of the alternatives is going to afford the greatest level of flood protection and the greatest protection during the next large storm event, because it came pretty close during Hurricane Sandy? And I think my response is that this specific project was focused on the resilience and stability of the shoreline. So making sure that during the next major storm event, the existing wall doesn't fail, and erode out the roadway and compromise the utilities and the road and the evacuation route and the emergency response. But getting to some of the secondary benefits for flood protection, I don't think that you are gaining shoreline stability at the expense of flood protection. I think you can get a little bit of both, but I think regardless of what we do to the wall, water is likely to find a way into the neighborhood just because of how low it is. Like Linnea mentioned, even if we bring the wall up and even if we take on one of the alternatives where we are building a little bit of a berm and giving some protection, if the water gets as high as it did in, say, Bob, it's likely that we call them flanking pathways. Like, we build the wall up, but the water comes around are likely not something that we're going to be able to plan for. During a less severe storm event, I think we can likely incorporate a bit of ancillary flood damage protection. But during the big one, regardless of what we do to the wall, I'm not trying to sound dire. I do think water is likely to find a way in.
Yeah. We want you to evacuate during the big one.
Not as a town, saying that not as town.
Yes,
I-
I do
if I
not
could just
work for the town.
clarify-
I'm saying that personally.
So those were great. Did you have a question over here? I heard you say next question. That
Did
was
he
what.
actually ask part of it? My concern is
Come around.
a couple different things, but going back to the stairs, if you're removing stairs, I must say that I've lived on North Water Street for 18 years, and there's been nothing done by the land trust other than putting up that kiosk that basically gives you the tides and tells you what not to put on that area of land. They've never mowed the lawn. All the people that live there do that. But if you're removing stairs, I mean, are they going to maintain the ones that are there? Because they've done squat thus far. So that's my whole concern. I mean, I understand that that's sort of going away from what you're bringing to the table, but in terms of alternatives, we need to have the land trust follow through with the suggestions of what you bring up, long-term.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so I hear you and I agree with you. The conditions of the stairs are not, it's not acceptable, right?
But
So,
nothing's been done since I've lived there at all.
right.
At all.
So we are in a newer phase of having staff. We have a lot of properties, we're looking at the issues, and we would like to work with the Conservation Commission to get some improvements to the stairs regardless of any of this. So, like, that needs to happen. If this happens, the way we looked at where putting the stairs was specifically like in line with road layouts, thinking that that might have been access points previously, but that's the kind of thing that feedback would be helpful on. Like, if looking at some of those, if we removed stairs in the plans that absolutely could not be removed and you guys needed them, we would need to hear that. I don't know if I answered your question, but I hear you that it's not been acceptable, that the
I just
condition
feel
of them.
that, I've seen through the Wareham Weekly that you're interested in purchasing additional properties. And
Yeah.
my feeling is if you can't maintain what you got, like, why don't you put some of that money into things?
To be fair, we didn't put them in. If we had put the stairs in, then I would
Not only the
expect that we would
stairs.
maintain them also.
I'm talking about in
So-
general. I mean,
Right.
the wall has been falling down for years.
Right.
And nobody maintains the lawn. And that kind of thing, that's like the whole property has not been maintained.
Yeah, I think the expectation, it's like a clarification of expectations. The land trust would never mow an area to be a lawn, just to be a lawn. We let you guys do it and we don't come down there and police it because we know that that's important to you. So if that's something that your neighborhood wants, I guess keep it a lawn for now, and we're not gonna stop you from doing it. Don't keep increasing it. Don't take out the little pockets of, there's a couple nice natives in there. But that isn't that is not something we even, that's not a management's objective that we have it for. We have it for you guys to be able to access it, but we're not looking for a park.
No, I understand that.
Yeah.
I understand that.
And I think just to repeat the question is just, that was a conversation regarding maintenance of the existing stairs and the trust's obligation to maintain them, or a desire from the local residents to maintain the stairs. I think the only point that I would make to that end is everything that we showed tonight is extremely expensive. Even the most limited repairs to that wall, you've got 2,500 linear feet of wall. Very expensive. Is it 2,500? You looked like you were thinking it was not.
No, I was just
That was
realizing.
what-
You're right. I was just realizing it.
That was what came off the top of my head. So you've got almost a half mile of seawall repairs. Very expensive. To Alex's point regarding the stairs, I think that we also need to be thinking about what can be done in the interim, because that's going to be like a big project to chew on. I imagine it will be a very robust discussion at town meeting if it ever comes to that. But I do think that there are opportunities to make some improvements in the interim that are cost effective, enhance public access and safety. I just over, yep.
I just wanted a clarification. On Code Street, the area that has the seagrass on either side, that has always been a beach for years. It was when they dredged and made the channel that the beach went away. And so to restore it, if that's possible, is that what I understood you said was a potential?
And I'm going to follow up with another point of clarification. Is that the same beach that this gentleman was referring to between the two salt marsh patches? So it wasn't an area that we explicitly called out, and it's interesting history to know that that beach eroded more precipitously after the dredging. It wasn't an area that we were planning or proposing to really focus beach nourishment on, mainly because there's not a beach there right now, so we didn't know that site history.
Oh, it was a beach for years.
So the feedback from both residents that that's an area that was high and dry in the past may help us to make an argument for some beach nourishment there in the future. So thank you for that. Yes, sir.
I don't know what you're using for a number for storm surge during hurricanes. I lived through the ones in the middle 50s, and you can expect probably 8 feet above the high water mark, which would put probably 4 or 5 feet above North Water Street.
Mhm.
And all that water is got to get out
Yeah.
underneath the bridge. The wall that's there now has survived. I think it was built before the 38 hurricane, so it has survived all hurricanes. The only bad part of it is on the corner of the cove.
Mm-hmm.
North water, when the water comes around the corner, it's been eroding it there,
Mm-hmm.
so.
Yeah. So this person's talking.
What you're gonna do for flood is not much.
Yeah, that's
Right.
so this person's mentioning, the hurricanes that have been seen in the past. It's when there's a storm, the water really does come up high, and I think the moral of the story, I'd say, for flood protection is that Onset Ave, the elevation of Onset Ave, putting the wall any higher than that is not helping much, right? Because when water comes over Onset Ave, then it's just behind the wall. So yeah, you're right that you're not going to gain too much, but I think that we can think about, what you would gain, and we'll have that in the report as well. I did a whole vulnerability assessment, so you'll be able to see, what is the flood vulnerability now in the future, and then what can you gain maybe by putting the wall a little bit higher.
And I think the concern was how many more storms does the wall have in it before it's done. It's certainly done its Hmm.
I have postcards that show no wall.
That would be really interesting to see.
I do too.
If that's something, if you want to email it to me or send a picture on your phone to the trust, that would be great. And I feel like that would be great to include in the site history when we
Yes.
put that section together and report back to you. There's a question just over here.
The best thing is to repair the wall on North Water Street, fix the stairs, the corner of North Water and Cove, that has to be replaced. And the wall coming right down to the Association Beach, fix all those stairs, and the wall is split almost down by the beach there.
Mm-hmm.
4-foot gap in between,
Yep.
like two walls. So I think that'd be, I mean, it's a lot of money, but I think this is the best way to start off this whole thing.
The comment for the folks that were on Zoom, and I'm going to ask for clarification before we move on to the next one, but is investing in repair, there's a suggestion to invest in repairs between or along North Water Street, make the necessary repairs at the corner of North Water and Cove, and invest in the repairs that extend down to Sandy Beach Association along Cove, and potentially make some improvements to the beach where there's an existing gap between the beach and the seawall.
And I would save all the stairs that are already there.
And preserve
Take them out.
preserve the stairs that are existing. Don't reduce the access points.
Does there need to be any railing to update things? I mean, not that I want that, but does there need to be railings placed? Because I think that that's a great suggestion, but from a legal
Do you
perspective,
mean on the top of the wall?
yeah.
So that's a good question. I haven't seen that in the past. I think that the issue with regarding a railing would be, in my mind jumps directly to the stairs rather than the wall itself.
Okay, no, I would prefer not to have a railing.
I-
I just didn't know.
Yeah,
like-
and I don't know off the top of my head. I haven't seen it except basically in public parks or in Boston.
Well, you put up
so-
a deck, you gotta have a
Yeah.
railing.
Yeah, the code is if it's more than a 3-foot drop, but I think that if the seawall were repaired here, I think they wouldn't probably push for a railing. A rebuilt seawall is more of a question mark in my mind. I'm not sure if it would be required to have a railing or not.
Yeah, or if, let's say there was a rebuild, maybe it ends up being a split rail fence or something along those lines rather than a rail. But I don't know the regulation, but it's a good point. And the question was relative to whether a railing would be required along the seawall. There was a question here in front.
You said the current phase of this project runs until the end of June.
Correct.
Is your deliverable at the end of June to mature these alternatives and present all of them? Or do you present them with we think we should do number X?
That's a really good question. So what our intention is to hear back from you tonight, make some minor modifications, but not really a broad revisioning of what was presented tonight, and then be able to synthesize that into some key takeaways relative to each. And I think that we're likely not at the point where we're putting our finger on what should be done, but I think it's going to require additional conversations with the trust as the owner, with the town as the direct abutter. And I don't know as though those parties are going to reach a consensus about how they want to proceed by June. I think that what you're going to see back from us is a really well-rounded version of what we discussed tonight in additional detail. But I don't know as though the trust and the town are going to be prepared to come to you and say, this is how we want to proceed at that time.
Yeah, if I could just add some comments.
Sure.
So Woods Hole Group, we're asking for their opinion on what's feasible, but fundamentally it will be the land trust and the town, with input from abutters who decides the way to move forward. The final summary that Adam mentioned, that they'll submit to us when the project is all said and done, we plan to put on our website, as well as many other documents from this project, including this presentation, so that the public can access it in the future as we continue to discuss the fate and future of this site.
And I think, I'm probably getting in the weeds here, but we anticipate as a part of that report, putting together a decision support tool. So putting a table together of the alternatives, their components, relative cost, very high level relative costs, whether we see any big snags with permitting, whether we see opportunities for additional flood damage protection, that might be something that we would incorporate in. And that's going to help to visualize the pros and cons of each, but I'm always very reluctant to put as a consultant, very reluctant to put my finger on what should be done. I'm very careful about making that decisive a recommendation.
There's a question in the Zoom chat that we'll just cover briefly.
Yep. And then,
Yeah. Before, yeah, of course. So the person in the Zoom chat is asking whether any construction here, any improvements or repairs to the seawall on North Water Street will have any impact on the other side of the river on East Boulevard. And I think the answer to that question is probably not. Although, you know, dynamics could change in the river, especially if there's a revetment built. It's so far away, you know, it's far enough apart that we don't anticipate.
Yeah, there's hard infrastructure there now. I think if we took an approach that softened the hard infrastructure or included a bit of nourishment, or maybe, let's say a sloping rock revetment went in, I don't see any impacts being exacerbated by investing in the infrastructure in this location as a result of this project. There's a question in front, and then we'll go to the back.
I'm just trying to picture when the water level's high, it's coming in from Onset Avenue. It seems like we'd be coming across Onset Avenue, South Water Street. In my mind, that wall looks higher than the North Water Street wall. That there are a couple places we can step through the wall down to the beach. I don't know the true level of that is, but it appears like when you're walking on the sidewalk, it's like that high.
Yeah, I think it might be the holes in the wall that are where the water's getting through, but there's going to be a really detailed flood pathways graphic. Oh, I'll repeat the question as well, sorry. So the question is about how water is getting over Onset Ave and South Water Street, and whether the seawall there is really lower than North Water Street, because it seems like it's higher in person. I think it's the openings in the wall most likely, but I have a detailed flood pathways graphic, and you can see kind of where things start to come in at different levels, at different water elevations. And yeah, so there's definitely a lot of details and nuance in that kind of thing.
We're also extremely cognizant of not creating a bathtub by elevating the wall or putting a berm in. So that's why we keep indicating that stormwater improvements are to be determined. The town has invested in the initial phases of that, and they're still trying to figure out what their final approach is going to be in this location. But we want to make sure that if we do raise elevations, we still give the neighborhood the ability to drain effectively. So a lot of things to think about. There's a question in the back.
Cause a coincidence, but each time the town has dredged the East River and Broad Cove, we've lost beach. And where she mentioned the other side of North Water Street, the beach on the other side, that's non-existent now. You have maybe a foot of sand at high tide, and it was never that way. And I spoke at the last meeting. I grew up on those beaches, and they're just cooked. Now, because of the town's malfeasance in letting all that water wash out underneath the seawall and wash out part of the beach, they're replacing that sand? I'll leave that up to the director of the land trust. Argue with the towns.
Yeah, so I can't speak on behalf of the town, but it is a good question about whether there is a larger beach nourishment project that's warranted here. Feedback that I did hear from the town very early on in this project was they had hesitance regarding a larger beach nourishment project because they didn't want it to mobilize right back into the channel and create an impediment to boat traffic. But the points from multiple parties tonight relative to the impact of dredging on, this is me extrapolating, on the velocity of the currents through the channel and the ability to pull sand is noted. I have a feeling that maybe velocities were increased and that sand was pulled out of the system.
Each time they dredged there, the sand was put around the corner and on the main beach. There is more sand on the main beach than you can imagine, because people that grew up around there, there's a walkway at the back of that beach. And it used to be about 2 feet, when I was a kid, about 2 feet above the sand.
Mhm.
There's no walkway, and it's there,
Mhm.
but it's buried. And I'll guarantee that if they dredge again, sand's going out there. One of the things that they don't think about is that the beaches, whether it's a private beach, and the beach was owned by the Hammond family. Anybody could use the beach, but those beaches are a draw for the town.
Mhm.
They're a draw for Onset. And they refuse to do anything because it's privately owned beach.
Understood. Thank you for that history, and we're gonna bounce over here.
Big though, to put the sand in around Broad Cove, right down off Water Street on the beaches, and they wouldn't, they put it out on the main beach.
Private beach, Bob Hammond owned it, went up, we can't do that on private property. We can erode most of the beach by the drains for the water. We could do that, but we can't put sand down.
And just for folks online who have been listening, the question or comment was relative to the impacts of dredging on the stability of the beach and beach losses following dredging events. Yes.
Okay, full disclosure, I'm a selectman, don't hate me. I've been a selectman for a year, Sarah Quinn. I'm here because some people on North Water Street reached out to me early on. So I really am invested in at least understanding this whole process, and that's fascinating. Probably this is more a question for the trust. Where are you guys thinking of getting funding for this? CPC money, or you have no idea at this point, not given that you really don't know how much this is gonna cost?
We aren't there yet. We'll be looking at kind of all funding sources, but it'll be a bigger conversation with the town. Yeah,
So we could be talking years for this to happen, right?
we are talking years.
And that would be true regardless of whether we were talking to you about a design or not, just because, reluctantly I say just because the regulatory requirements to get this passed, you're probably looking at a 2-year process just for regulatory.
More than 2 years.
Yeah.
So then we have to engineering and,
4 years to get sand on our beach, which we
Yeah.
did last year, and I could only do a certain amount, okay? I have a friend that's on the waterways in Boston, okay? Because of him, I was able to get the sand, right? That's how tough it is, all right?
So for,
That's why the access discussion about the current situation being at least temporarily repaired and so that no one gets hurt is probably.
what are the immediately actionable items?
That
Yeah.
can happen sooner rather than later, and then we just keep pushing for, the bigger effort.
Right.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna look into ways that we can make that possible.
yeah. Just about here at that time.
So I've got a question over here, but before we jump to that, for folks that have been on Zoom, there was a question regarding how the trust might be financing next steps. Alex chimed in and let the select board member know that we're not there yet with the town and that those conversations are ongoing. There was a follow-up conversation about the timeline for regulatory being years out for any improvements in this location. And then a conversation was redirected to what immediately actionable items could be addressed in the interim. Yes, sir.
I just had a question. Is this project ever been coordinated with the town regarding, we hear rumors that they're putting all new water mains in there, and I would hope at some point that it would mean that they would be redoing North Water Street, because the road is a disaster.
They're putting in new water pipes down North Water, Cove Street, Locust Street, and then they're gonna repave. But that could be a few years yet.
Yeah, so the question was regarding coordination with the town regarding improvements to North Water Street. So we had a really great turnout of town officials at the kickoff meeting for this project. After the kickoff meeting that we had over at the fire department to review our scope, we walked the site with the town officials as well. I think we had 6 folks from the town that were out there with us, walked the full length of the project. They pointed out site history and what they knew about the drainage infrastructure, utilities, seawall, et cetera, and ownership with the right-of-way extending onto the land trust parcel. And there were some conversations that we had with town officials regarding how any improvements to the wall could be constructed in a way that also accommodates improvements to North Water Street. And there was a conversation, and as soon as we cross the line over into the road, we're on town property, and this is a land trust project. But there was robust conversation about opportunities to potentially raise the elevation of North Water a bit. I mean, can't promise anything, and the town hasn't gotten there yet in their design, but it's a part of the conversation. They're a partner on this project. They know that it's happening, and we're going to close the loop with them before we're done.
So we're on our way to wrapping up. We have one more question in the back, but before that, I did want to open it up to questions. If anyone on the Zoom wanted to speak, you can raise your hand and then we'll allow you to speak and you can ask a question, or you could still put a question in the chat if that is preferable.
In the meantime, would the person in the back like to state their question?
Yes. Yep.
I just wanted to talk about the stones. You were saying something about putting larger stones to block for parking.
Mm-hmm.
You have to keep in mind that the emergency vehicles have to be able to make the swings out of the road. We have to move the rocks that are there now for them when they have to come out, like on Grove Street and probably down around the corner near those guys. I'm sure because of parking and everything else, you don't have a lot of room for them to have the swings.
Mm-hmm.
It's a large moving van, anything like that, so you can't really put large stones up either.
Okay, so yeah, the comment is about the current stones. They have to be moved when there's a big vehicle or when there's emergency vehicles getting down there, and that's a good thing to note. It's always important to maintain a fire lane, and then I think there's probably potential to design in a way where you can be preventing parking, but also be removing them easily, or have pockets of areas where the larger vehicles could get in. So we'll make a note of that.
Especially in the summertime, try to get vehicles down there.
Yeah. Is that because cars are all parked along the road? Okay, so basically there's not a fire lane anymore. Okay.
And
Just
yeah.
as I don't know if I've ever seen people parking on the water side, right? It's a narrow street and we've got cars all the way up on the houses side, but I don't think we've had, granted the rocks in
Well,
there.
because the rocks in there, that's
Yes,
why.
but
Otherwise,
so
people
it's
used to
not,
park there.
right, so it's not people are not parking it because they.
Yeah.
And that-
the rocks are working.
yeah.
Drop people
Okay.
off, you drop off a kayak or whatever, but basically the park, it's just a narrow street where you have every spot on the, off the bank side, if you will, car after car.
Yeah, and I think that was tricky. That was a feature that we included on the figures that we weren't quite sure about, but it was something we heard an awful lot about during the first stakeholder meeting, that the stones had been placed and that was precluding people from parking, and folks didn't want parking over on the land trust side. So
I don't think there is parking on that side, right?
No.
Right, you're not supposed to park.
right,
Some
right.
signs were removed by vandals.
Yeah, there were a lot of comments about how the rocks had been placed by residents to keep people from parking there. And so it was something that we carried, but again, especially hearing about the emergency response, I think it's,
Too narrow to have people parking on both sides. That's when it was listed as no parking.
mhm.
You only park on the one side, and it's tough even then for the emergency vehicles to get through. But then when you're coming out of some of those other roads,
They can't swing, they've got to swing out onto the parcel. Okay.
Trucks for them to get out.
Yep.
And that happens with delivery trucks and a lot of different things. We have to move them forward so they can make the swing.
So again, immediately actionable. I think improved signage is something to be thinking about. Maybe the rocks remain, maybe they don't. I know that this gentleman, we talked during the last meeting, your suggestion was potentially granite curbing over on that side. to keep cars from driving out onto the trust parcel side. But that still comes into play for the swing radius of the emergency response. So that's a great point. Thank you. In the back, and we'll wrap up after that. Oh my.
The question is, who authorized putting those rocks on the side of the road? No, it just happened, I think.
I've spoken to, they bought the rocks and put them out there themselves.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And I'm saying, just like I have on other things, you went and cut down the trees in front of your house that were growing on the land that the land trust and the Hammond family owned because it blocked your view. Who authorized you to go and cut those trees? Who authorized you to put the rocks? I saw a guy rip his whole muffler off the car with one of the rocks.
Yeah, there's a comment about, the rocks, who authorized the placing of the rocks. I think the answer is that there's a lot of maintenance of the site and stuff going on the site that's not authorized. That's just residents doing what they think is appropriate.
Yeah.
What a dozer throw and mow them all out. And you can put them over by the bridge where you wanted to put some more stone, and, see, it's a win-win.
All right. So with that, I think we'll wrap things up. I again appreciate everybody coming out tonight. It was hot up here. We had a small screen. We appreciate everybody squinting and leaning in. We hope that this provides you with more information about what we've been up to. And we look forward to closing the loop with the town, the trust, and CZM, and being able to send a final version of this study over to all of you this summer.
Right.
So thank you for your questions and your engagement on this project, and appreciate you all coming out.
And thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
Before anyone goes, hold on. Couple quick things. So as we said earlier, we'll be putting out all the deliverables on our website for this project eventually. First of all, the postcards, people said they have postcards without the wall. I think CZM would be interested in that. We'd be interested in just seeing those as well. So if one or two of you could stay after the meeting to talk about where we could see that, that'd be great. There was a sign-in sheet. I'm going to ask that if you didn't sign the sign-in sheet at the start of the meeting, if you could sign it before you leave, that would be great. It's good for us to know who was here. It's also good for us to show the people who funded this project that this project is getting a lot of public engagement. Lastly, I just have to ask this because I'm outreach chair of the Wareham Land Trust. I'm just curious how people heard about the event. Who heard about it through our social media? Newsletter? Wareham Week? Okay. Anything else I'm missing? The Onset Bay Association? Oh, they posted about it? On Facebook or?
Correct.
Okay. Good to know. All right. Thank you all for coming.
Yeah.
Please be sure to learn about the candidates who are running tomorrow and vote your country.
Yeah.
We got a nutcase that lives behind us.